Well, welcome back to another session. At the onset of the day, I asked you to imagine that everything in your company you planned to achieve had come true. You've now heard some inspiring stories of success from your peers and insights from thought leaders. A favorite quote of mine from Charles Duhigg is, "Motivation is triggered by making choices that demonstrate to ourselves that we are in control." The past few hours have been about making those choices, seeing what's possible, and then deciding to take that very first step. So my question to all of you right now, what's holding you back? We're going to launch a poll. As you answer that question, I want to remind you that Val Wright is up in just a minute, and then we have another session after where we will be discussing how HR leaders face a world where skill gaps, automation, and transformation are happening faster than ever before. The title of it is "The Future is Skills-Based, Transforming HR Practices for Tomorrow." You should not miss that session. Danny Johnson, co-founder of Red Thread Research, is leading a discussion that will include an all-star lineup of HR leaders, including Kendra Angier from the CoreLogic CHRO and Vidya Krishnan, the CLO at Ericsson. It couldn't be better. Okay, we're going to be moving on to Val's session next. Earlier, innovation and strategy expert Val Wright asked you to draw 3 circles: you, your organization, and your community. She asked you to fill in the how. How will you achieve your boldest ambitions? Now it's time to go deeper. So let's first reveal the results of the poll. Let's take a look at what we have here and see what the top answers are. Executive support is that number 1 on there? I think number 1 is executive support and budget. And is it still open? I think I see some numbers moving around there, but it looks like those are going to be the 2 winners as we speak: executive support and budget. Time is followed third. Val, welcome back.
Thank you, John. I also saw mindset shifts took a late lead in that as well. So very excited to be with you for the next 60 minutes. Thank you, John, for that reconnection and that introduction. I have a question. Have you ever been to a coffee shop, picked up your coffee, taken a sip, and then realized, what do? Do you say something or do you not say anything? Now, I'm British and we are known for liking our cues or lines. And so I might not say anything. I might just go back in the queue and just go order another drink because I don't really want to bother. Because maybe it was me, maybe I confused them in my order. But what would you do? Would you say something? Well, it was interesting because the managing editor of Forbes a few years ago was at WeWork's headquarters. And he was there to interview the then CEO of WeWork, Adam Neumann. And he did just that. He went to the corporate coffee shop and he ordered a latte, but he was handed the wrong drink. He was handed a cappuccino and he took a sip and he said to the barista, he's not British, he doesn't mind, he said something. And he said, "This isn't what I ordered." And you know, when like a really important person comes to visit your office, there's usually an entourage around them. Well, the entourage, in hearing him say he got the wrong drink, all of a sudden came around him and went, "Shh, don't say anything." And he's like, what did I do? What did I do wrong? And they said, "Well, here, we call lattes cappuccinos and cappuccinos lattes." And the managing editor thought, this is strange, I don't understand. He's like, "Why?" And he said, "Well, a few years ago, our CEO ordered a latte, but he really wanted a cappuccino and he was confused about the amount of frothy milk that he has in a drink and what it's called. So rather than tell him, what we do now is we call cappuccinos lattes and lattes cappuccinos here." Now, this might seem like a really silly story about someone's drink preference and what they did, but in actual fact, now in hindsight, a few years later, when we know what happened at WeWork, and if you haven't yet seen the Hulu documentary or the Netflix documentary about the inner workings of WeWork and what happened and the boom and the bust of WeWork, this story was set in the time when it was still booming and he was considered a darling of business and rapid growth. But why wouldn't anyone tell him he was describing his coffee drinks wrong? Why wouldn't he have someone who just tells him the truth? And as you learn about the WeWork story, if you haven't studied it, then it's certainly worth going to look. There were a lot of people that weren't willing to be truth tellers to their CEO. And so it's something that I have realized in my research, that if you want to grow rapidly, if you want to create a culture of innovation and growth, you have to create a culture of truth tellers. And so what WeWork eventually discovered was there weren't people who were willing to stand up and tell the truth about the company's valuation, about the inner workings of what was happening in the company. And while you might not have people around you who are willing to call you out when you maybe make a mistake or you say something wrong, think about whether there's a boss you've worked for who has created an environment where it just wasn't actively encouraged for you to share news, whether it was good, whether it was bad, whether it was mediocre, or whether it was downright difficult to hear. So if you want to learn more about truth-telling, then I feature WeWork and a number of other companies in those who do a great job of embracing truth-telling. But in your roles as chief HR officers, as chief people officers, as head of talent, all the different functions within the human resources function, embracing being a bold truth teller is what sets you apart. It's what tells an executive that you are valuable to have around and you will hold the mirror when sometimes people won't around them. Now, you can hold up the mirror, they might not look, but your job to be able to share those stories and be able to share that feedback is a really essential part of executive communication. And what I'm going to be doing for the next 53 minutes is sharing with you some ideas, some tools that you can immediately use to help you become the ultimate executive and leader who can drive rapid growth, who can influence your CEO and help you deliver the results that your company is looking for. I'm going to share some ideas and some slides. Remember at the start how I said you can screenshot any of these slides. We will share them with you afterwards as well. If there's a particular tool that you want, I will show you how you can text me and ask for that tool as well, so that you get that digitally, so that you can use that and share as you wish. And don't forget to use the hashtag EmpowerHR2025 and tag BetterWorks. You can tag me too, Val Wright, on any of your social platforms. So when you think about how you influence, I am going to share with you a set of numbers, and I'm going to share with you something for you to think about how you approach, how you influence others. These are the numbers. I'm going to say them, I'm going to explain them, and I'm going to ask you to think about them. 1, 5, 15, 50, 500, and 5,000. These are your influence intentions. Think about these numbers, and I'm going to describe what each of them mean. Number 1 is your CEO. Think for a minute about your CEO. How much do you know what is important to them today? Because in a CEO's life, what's important today might not be the same as what was important last month or last quarter or last year. And sometimes, depending on what level you are at the organization, sometimes communication is incredible and sometimes it gets stuck. And so do you know what's top of mind and what's a priority for your CEO right now? And let me give you an example of when something changed. I was working with a particular CEO who had $1 billion company. And it was very clear, it was a private equity-backed company, and it was very clear that enterprise value or EBITDA growth was the number one priority. And so everything around their strategy and all of their tactics and all of their efforts and all of their rewards program was around driving EBITDA in enterprise value growth, because the private equity company wanted to position that company for sale. And then the private equity company within their portfolio suddenly had an opportunity to invest in a brand new market segment. And they needed short-term cash generation. So in a matter of weeks, it changed from being about long-term enterprise value to short-term cash generation. So this CEO immediately had to pivot and change the direction, change his financial projections, change his inventory management, and change his sales team's rewards to create short-term cash generation for the private equity firm because they needed to grow their portfolio. And that CEO did a really good job of communicating and cascading that. But sometimes it gets stuck. Sometimes if you're a public company, it's very clear and you can follow along with the earnings reports and you get that information. But ask yourself, how well do you know what the CEO is looking for? And has that changed recently? Number 5 is 5 cheerleaders. This is something that's changed in the last 5 years. The speed in which executives change jobs, the tenure of executives is a lot smaller. And so who were your cheerleaders last year may not be your cheerleaders in 6 months later. And overnight, I have texts from executives who are perfectly satisfied on a Friday. And by Monday, one of their executives have left and they've taken 3 executives with them. And all of a sudden, those 5 cheerleaders have reduced to 2 or even disappeared. So a cheerleader is an internal champion for you. They're the person that will ensure that your strategy gets approved, who will approve your budgets, who will help you with your promotions, who will help you with your network, who will help you grow. How are your 5 cheerleaders? 15 represents your executive team. Now, I know we have a number of chief people officers and chief HR officers here who may well have an executive team of 15. Some of you may be in other functions or other disciplines where your company executive team is what you have to focus on. When you think about your executive team, it's how well are they aligned on their strategy, aligned on what the company wants, and what you and your function are trying to produce to create business results. That's your executive team you need to influence. 50 represents the 50 top people leaders who manage others. They are the middle layer of management who take that strategy and make it happen. How well do you, in your current role, influence those 50 people leaders? 500 are the people that actually do the work. So you may not have 500 people in your team or in your extended team, but who are those 500 people who make the difference in the work that you need to do? In human resources, you may have people in the finance team, in the sales operations team, in the change and transformation team. You may have different people who you need to implement your work. Who are those 500 internal people? And then the 5,000 external fans. Those are the people outside of the company, in your industry, in your functional area of expertise. Who knows you? How is your reputation? How well are you being tapped to do speaking engagements, to be considered for career moves, to be interviewed in the media? That's your 5,000 external fans. Now what I want you to do is, I'm going to give you some time to think about, given what you want to achieve in the next year, in your company and in your career, which of these numbers are most important to you? You might say, Val, I have got an incredible relationship with my CEO. Everything's great there. I'm good. I don't need any help there. Or it may be you've got 5, you maybe have more than 5 cheerleaders. It's like, I'm good there, but I really need to work on unlocking the people leaders in my team. Or I really need to work on that external reputation. So think for a minute, and we're going to launch the poll. And I am going to give you a minute of reflection right here. You can see my sand timer. If we can launch the poll, if you go to the poll tab, which is in the right-hand corner, just over there, click the poll and just pick one. I know you want to pick all of them. If you want to pick more than one, just add in the comments which other ones you also want to pick. But pick the one, if you had to prioritize, the one that will make the most difference. Pick which one that is. So I'm going to ask to share the screen. So we have 5% voting for CEO, 15% cheerleaders, 10% executive team, 41% on the people leaders. That looks like it's the winner so far. 15% on internal team members and 10% on the external fans. Okay, so feel free to keep adding your comments in the chat and then go to the Q&A tab if you have a particular question to ask. And I appreciate you giving me your insights there. And thanks for sharing the poll results. And so what we're going to be doing, this is what I call a choose your own adventure. And so when I was younger, I used to have those. Do you ever have those choose your own adventure books where you're at the edge of a forest, and if you want to go through the stream, you jump to page 67, or if you want to go back in the other direction through a different forest, you jump to page 156. This is what that is. It helps me see where there is most interest or energy for the tools that I can provide. And so what I'm going to be doing now is giving you some examples of how you can increase your 1, 5, 15, 50, 500, and 5,000 so that it will strengthen your influence. And these are tools that you can use. And they're also tools that you will find in my books along the way. So I'll explain which tools are in which book as we go through. So let's talk about your CEO then. So John mentioned this at the start of the session where he said, just imagine in 2027, where would you be? Do you know the answer for this for your company? And depending on what industry your company is in, maybe you work in a 2-year window or a 4-year window or a 10-year window, depending on which industry you're in. But do you know what the future strategy looks like? Do you know what industry, what markets, what customers, what products, what services that you are aiming for in the future? Because as executives and leaders in the people and talent space, you need to know that business leapfrog leap so that you can create the compelling people strategy and the people leapfrog leap. And so what I often encourage leaders to do is, if you think about in the future, say you think back to 2027 and where you want the company to be, now what you do is you time travel your CEO and your executive team to that future with the size, the scale, the markets, the products, the services, the customers. And you ask yourself, how many of those executives are in the biggest jobs of their lives? Or how many have been there, done that before? And that will help you see what your potential talent gap or skill gap is to create that business growth so that you can connect your people strategy to your business strategy. And I have one leader that I worked with who was actually the board chair of a company. And he was telling me how they were planning to expand into Europe. And so I drew this on a whiteboard in the meeting room I was in with him, and I did the catapult question and the time travel question. And he said, "Yeah, we're going to be expanding in Europe." I'm like, "Great! Like let's look at your board and let's look at your CEO and executive team. How many people have experienced working in Europe before?" And there wasn't anyone on the team who had done that. Not that they wouldn't be capable of experimenting, but you don't need everyone in the biggest jobs of their lives. And so being able to position it to think in this way allows you to have those conversations so you can build that into your overall talent plan and your overall business strategy. The other area for you to consider is when you are looking at where you spend your time right now. Are you truly focusing on the right spot? And I love looking at all the comments earlier around, the habits that people have to help them be most effective. And I want you to think back for a moment on the last 3 months. Just think back for a moment for the last 3 months. Where have you spent your time? So think back for the months of January, February. We're nearly finished in March. What meetings did you attend? What projects did you work on? What conversations were you having? What open space time thinking were you having? And how much of it was spent thinking about your business in 3 to 5 years? How much of it was spent in the 1 to 2 year window? How much of it was spent in the 6-month window? How much of it was spent on the immediate here and now? And then the work you were doing, how much of that was delivery of existing plans? How much of it was exploring new possibilities? And how much of it was thinking about blue sky imagination of what is possible? And so if I asked you now to draw an imaginary circle about where you've typically spent your time in the last 3 months, and then draw an imaginary heart of where you would love to be spending your time, where would the circle be and where would the heart be? And then there is a difference between strategy and execution. And some of you may well be in execution roles, and that's totally great. But you need to make sure that the right people are focused on the right spot in your company. And what I often hear when I draw this picture and when I get leaders to reflect as we're embarking on a strategic planning workshop is many executives pull into the bottom left-hand corner too fast and too easily. And it really is a strong gravitational pull to the here and now. So I'm curious, like, tell me in the comments or ask me a question around where you are today and where you'd like to be, and what is getting in the way. What is it that's pulling you into more of the here and now and not giving you the space and time and freedom to imagine the possibilities? And that is one of the ways that you can influence your CEO and your executive team, by helping them see what's possible if they focus on the right spot. And this one is in Thoughtfully Ruthless, which is all about managing your time, your energy, and your resources and freeing up space. So feel free to ask me any questions that you have as you go through. I'm going to keep going at a rapid pace and add any questions you have to the Q&A tab, so that I can make sure that I am answering them. I'm just going to pause for a minute and take a look at the Q&A, because I see a number are coming through. Okay, so one of the questions back to the 1, 5, 15 is, are these numbers scalable to a smaller organization? Absolutely, yes. So that's why I include the descriptions as well as the numbers. So think about the categories of the people. So you may not have 50 people leaders, and that's okay. You might not have 500 in your team or even in your company, but think of it in terms of 5,000 is the external reputation. 500 are the internal doers for you to deliver your work. 50 are the people managers who are leading the teams. 15 are the executive team who design and create the strategy. And then the 5 are your cheerleaders. That still stays at 5. And then you have your CEO. So Naomi, I hope that answers your question. If you have a follow-up one, feel free to add more to the chat. Susan asked, how did I come up with these numbers? And where did it come from? And it came from my research, and it came from my last 35 years in corporations and seeing where leaders need help in focusing their intention when they think about influence. And so that's where those numbers came from, to help prioritizing how you think about where you may spend your time. And great. So I'm going to move on, and please keep asking me those questions as they go through. And you can see you can actually upvote questions too. So we're now going to move on to cheerleaders. So think about, by name, and you don't have to put any of this in the chat, but think about by name, who are the people who've got your back at work? Who are the people that can endorse you for a promotion? Who are the people who will tap you on the shoulder to tell you to go do this stretch assignment in another part of the company? Who are the people who you need on your side to get approval for a new initiative? And I saw in the comments of the Lincoln Financial session, people were asking about, how do I get executive buy-in? How do I get business justification for a new project or a new initiative? It's having really strong cheerleaders. And this turnover that happens with cheerleaders means this is a really endless job that you have to do, because they can evaporate overnight. And so thinking about who your cheerleaders are is really important to prioritize where you spend your time. And so I created this influence bullseye as a way for you to think about, how do I improve the relationships with my cheerleaders? Or if I don't have enough of them, or if I don't have enough of them that right seniority, how do I get them, Val? I often get asked that question. So I call them power influencers. So these are the people who truly influence you, and they're incredibly, incredibly powerful. So you can add your CEO in there as well if there's someone that you want to work on. And it's very easy to think, okay, well, there's someone I need to influence. I need to get time with them. I need to present to them. I need to have regular one-on-ones with them. Here's a different approach, which is you find out who are the people who whisper in their ear. So let's say your CFO is someone who is someone who you need to be a cheerleader, who's a powerful influencer in your company. Who are the people that the CFO surrounds himself with? Who are the people who whisper in their ear? Because those are the people you want to build relationships with. Those are the people who you want to showcase your work, your brilliance, get pre-buy-in before you go pitch to the ultimate decision maker. So I call these amplifiers. And they are the people who will amplify you, because it's powerful for the CFO to see you in action. But if there's people around the CFO they trust and they say, you absolutely have to listen to Sarah, you won't believe this new initiative she's got, it's going to be incredible. That coming from someone they trust raises your profile and raises your power of influence. So I encourage you to think about for each of your power influencers. And if you want this toolkit, you can let me know, and I'll make sure I've got a workbook that comes with it as well. That's incredibly self-explanatory. It's just on one sheet of paper. You'll see my QR code down the bottom there. If you scan that, you can see there's different ways to connect with me. And so I know sometimes when you're on these events, you don't want to ask public questions. That's okay. I completely get it. You can scan that QR code and there's a text Val Now option. So you can text me and you have 24 hours to ask me anything. So if I don't happen to get to your question in time, I'll be filling them out after this session as well. But if you have a specific question that you want to ask me, then feel free to text me as well. So think about your power influence, you think about your amplifiers, and then in the red outer circle are your partners. So these are the people who you need to get your work done. I'm not saying you ignore these people, but you need to prioritize differently if you're trying to increase your power of influence. And so the reason why the green circle is in the middle of this bullseye, this is a different bullseye than you're used to. I'm not telling you you need to aim for the middle. I'm telling you you need to aim for that middle layer. And you need to aim to build those relationships with those amplifiers, because that's going to exponentially increase your reputation with your power influencers. So that is the idea of the influence bullseye. And I'm just going to check to see what questions we have along the way. I see a question that's, it's a very common one actually, saying, to have the time to thinking ahead is usually a staffing issue. How do you convince your CEO to staff your department to allow time for growth projects? It's a really great question right there. And you have to connect your department's impact to business results. And so this idea of return on effort, this idea of return on investment, I'm actually going to talk about business cases shortly as well. So you'll find that section useful, is you have to show why investing in resources in your team is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than any of the other functions. And to do that, you have to create that business case and that return on investment to be able to justify that. So I hope that helps and answers your question. The next, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead here. And there's the business case I was just talking about. Sorry about that. The next section that I want to show you is the idea of the magnetic executive. And we're going to have a little poll here, just for a moment. We're going to have a little poll shortly, but I want to describe to you, first of all, the magnetic executive. And so I want you to think about for a moment, when you consider how well you are known, how well are you known right now? And so this is a rising ladder of a description, from missing to mystery to memorable to magnetic. And so there are some people, if we start on the bottom rung of the ladder, there are some people that are missing in action. They're missing in action and nobody knows that you exist beyond people that you work with. If I was to Google you or search you on ChatGPT or on Perplexity, I wouldn't find very much about you. I like to describe this as being off the grid. Sometimes people are just missing. Then you have people who maybe you're known to people who know you well. And this often happens earlier in your career. If you think about this as the organizational pyramid, earlier in your career, you have a number of people who know you. As you rise in your career and you become more senior, You need to elevate who you hang out with. You need to elevate the events you attend. You need to elevate the people around you. And so sometimes you can hit a ceiling as you grow because you're so busy delivering results. You don't have time to manage your external reputation or how well you're known. And so sometimes it's easy to become a mystery as you get promoted in your career. If you are memorable, and here's the test, if you are memorable, then headhunters call you a lot, tapping you for other jobs. Other executives that you've worked with in the past are calling you because they remember you, because you are memorable. You get tapped to appear in the media. If you are, maybe companies are tapping you to do a joint venture, or investors want to invest in you because they hear about who you are and the products that you're creating. And you're always asked to speak at conferences and events. That's what it means to be memorable. To be magnetic, I call this, you're a leading authority. So you could maybe think of right now, and put it in the chat if you want, who's a magnetic leader in the HR space? Who's a magnetic leader in the business and performance space? Who's a magnetic leader in the CEO space, in the growth space? Who comes to mind for you? They are the people that it's no debate. It's like, you know who they are. If you talk marketing, who do you name? If you talk human resources, who do you name as a truly magnetic executive? I like to describe them as Pied Pipers. You know, people who leave a company and then they bring other people with them along the way. Who are those people? That's what it means to be magnetic. You have so many opportunities to speak, to appear in industry magazines, to be interviewed, to appear in the media, in print, online. You are featured everywhere. You are a leading authority. That's what it means to be truly magnetic. Now, some of you might be saying, Val, I don't want that. Like, what you're telling me makes me cringe, and I don't want to do that. I'm not saying you have to be magnetic. What I'm saying is you have to be very intentional about how do you show up and what is your reputation and where do you want your career to go and what's important to you. It's okay to say, I just want to be memorable, or, I'm currently missing and I need to really work on being a mystery. Why does this matter to you when you're trying to influence your CEO to fund you a new project, or to get you new headcount, or to get you promoted? Why does it matter? Because your external reputation influences your internal reputation. You get kudos internally when you're known externally. I often say to executives, the best internal communication is external communication. Let me say that again. Because the best internal communication is external communication. Because you've all got your newsletters, you've got your chat channels, you've got your Slack channels, your Teams channels, your internal SharePoints and blogs. But if you were interviewed in Inc. magazine, or on a particular website, or you were featured on your local news, and you share that video, that's going to get more attention than your regular internal communications. So the reason why you do this, even though you might be thinking, oh my goodness, I've never done this before, or I don't know if this is for me, this is why you do this. So now I've explained it, mystery, missing, mystery, memorable, magnetic. Let's launch the poll. And I'm curious to see where you all stand. I'm going to give you another minute to answer the poll. And I always like to show you the method behind some of my tips and tricks here. So the reason I use this, I also have one of these as well, that you can't see. This is for me. The reason I do this, and sometimes you will see I'll have this right behind me, but you've all got the timers on the screen, so we don't need this today. The reason I do this is when you are communicating virtually, I know you all have multiple things that you're trying to deal with and gather focus. The more props and tools and different mechanisms you can use, the more helpful it is. The other reason I do this is because it gives you time to think. And giving you some silence is really valuable because, as you can tell, I've got a lot to say. I've got a lot of tools I can share. There's a lot of questions that come in the chat. Sometimes you just need a minute to think, okay, where am I? What does this need? I'm going to commit to a poll answer. And my screen wasn't froze. I intentionally stopped talking for 10 seconds then, because silence is very powerful when you need people to think. It's also very awkward. So you have to be okay with silence if you're the presenter. I usually tell people to count in their head to create that silence, and it allows people to think. I have an ADHD brain. So for those who have neurodiverse ways of thinking and processing information, space, time to think, and silence is incredibly powerful. So consider how you can implement some of these things in your team meetings when you're engaging with executives. So now I'm going to turn off my slides so we can launch the poll results. Okay, we have 6% who are magnetic, awesome. We have 23% who are memorable, 59% who are a mystery, and 10% who are missing. That's wonderful. And thank you for sharing and being willing to share that. And for those of you who do not want to share that publicly, that's totally fine. And you can scan my QR code and text me any questions that you've got. Okay, I'm going to pause to see what questions that we have here so I can make sure I answer any questions as we go along. If you haven't yet worked this out, I do Q&A as we go. There is not going to be a dedicated slot at the end of this session for Q&A. I'm doing this as we go, so feel free to ask as we go through. It's a real-time way of getting immediate feedback. Okay, there's a couple of questions about business cases and justification that I'm going to say till we get to the business case template, but keep adding your questions as we go through. Okay, now we're going to move on to the 15, which is the executive team. Here's another reflection for you. As you can tell, I like and think in pictures. And so this is a tool. This one is in the book that John held up earlier. It's Rapid Growth Done Right. And it is a way for you to reflect on how you make decisions. Because the number one frustration I hear from executive teams is confusion or disagreement, or you just don't like the way decisions are made around here. Or you think that decisions are made in a certain way, and then they end up being made in a completely different way. And so this is a way, and if we were doing an all-day workshop, I would get you to do this, and I would get you to share it with me, but I'm going to tease you with this and let you know that you can use this in your with your teams as you wish. And if you ask for the toolkit, then you'll get this digitally too. So if you think back to how you typically make decisions, and it's true for if you're moving house, if you're buying a car, or if you're buying a new technology, or if you're investing in something new at work, then you typically make decisions in a certain way. So there are 6 dimensions here. And this is a self-selection, self-assessed tool where you can put a little X as to how do you typically make decisions? Do you embrace risk or are you more cautious to risk? What about how you make decisions? How are you informed? Do you know because you have so much experience that you can trust your gut? Or do you like the data and the analytics and the justification to prove that? And so you can be somewhere in the middle, or you can be more to the left, or you can be more to the right. When you make a decision, do you make a decision and then it sticks even if you have new information afterwards? Or do sometimes you learn something new and you're like, wait a minute, well, let's reverse what we said last month because actually we now have new information, so we're going to go left and we're not going to go right. So do you decide and it sticks, or do you decide and undecide? Are you more of a consensus-driven leader or a solo-driven leader? And at this point, I want to say, this is there is no value judgment here. There is no right or wrong answer. And it's usually at this point that people are like, oh, that's better and that's worse. And it's not. What's important is that you understand how you like to make decisions, how your boss likes to make decisions, and those around you like to make decisions. I'll explain more. The next element is, do you tend to go for fast, quick, easy wins, or do you like to go after the big, bold, tough, and complex issues? And then do you typically make decisions fast, or do you prefer to take your time? So imagine now that you've got X's across all of those areas. Now, and you're maybe already thinking this, plot where your boss is. Think about that for a minute. Now think about other people that you work with. So one of the things that I do when I'm working with an executive team is I literally would explain it just how I explained it with you now. We'd be all sat in a room and I get people to mark on a piece of paper where they are. And then I put their initials. Let's say I've actually done this with John's team in the past. Everyone on John's team would rate themselves, but then they guess where John is. So they put a J where they think John is. And then we'd have a poster on the wall where we'd map everyone where they are. And then John would get some immediate feedback about how his team thinks they make decisions, which is fascinating insight for John. But then John can explain, actually, this is how I prefer to make decisions. This is where it gets really valuable, because the decision tenets that you can then create from this is, how do we want to make decisions to unlock what we are trying to achieve as a business? How do we create those rules so that even if the executive team isn't there, everyone knows how to make decisions? So I'll give you this example. This is a real example. I've changed the name of one of my clients, but these are the decision tenets that came out of once we talked about the decisions, the preferred ways of making decisions. And, John realized that he thought that he liked to make decisions based on gut, but really, he needs more data. So he told the team that, these are some examples. So you may have heard disagree and commit as it's actually one of the Amazon values that's used across the whole company. Is we can disagree in private, but once we've disagreed, you have to commit and then go implement without trying to second guess or change anything in the future. Being really clear on what decisions require escalation or what level. Because how many times have you thought you had the power to make a decision and then something changes and you're like, actually, no, it's got to go to the board, even though you thought you had that delegated authority. So there are some great examples in here of the idea of one-way and two-way door decisions. A one-way door decision is a decision you can't reverse. Like changing your payroll system is a one-way door decision. You can't undo that 6 months later easily or cheaply. But there are other two-way decisions that you can experiment and then change something. And so being really clear on what freedom people have around decisions is also incredibly powerful. And so I wanted to share some of those ideas and move on to something I know you've all been asking for in the chat, which is this idea of business cases. So one of the things that often comes out of these decision discussions with an executive team is, okay, but how do we make a decision? How do we know how to justify an extra $1 million investment in something new? And what surprised me is the amount of companies that have very flexible, shall we say, ways of making these decisions. And many times, some companies have this down and have incredibly business case profiles and committees and review boards and decision councils. If you have that, that's great. This is for all of you that don't have that, which is the idea of creating this business case so that you can justify and explore what could be future investments. I actually work with a credit union, and I was working with their CEO, and he said to me, Val, I need you to come in and run this strategic planning workshop. I went, great, yeah, that's great. He says, yeah, because we've got our 5-year plan and we've got our 32 strategic priorities and we need to put a plan in to implement them. I'm like, well, what did you just say? He said, oh yeah, we've got 32 priorities. And of course, 32 isn't a priority list. And so what we did is we ended up, as part of the review, is we asked people to complete a business case for each of those 32. And as it happened, those 32 turned into 16 pretty quickly when they realized the degree of depth you need before you launch a new strategic priority. So this is a framework that allows you to do that. This one is in my latest book, which is called Words at Work, which is full of don't say that, say this, and different ways to communicate so that you get what you want. So the first thing that you do is you capture the today's status and the future success. It's why John spoke at the start about what 2027 looks like for you. And you say, okay, what is it that I want to create in the future? And this is the interesting part, that sometimes there needs to be more common alignment around the reality of today in terms of what your customers, your competition, the speed you want to go, what costs exist, what revenue, what profit are you going to create, is very important. And then my favorite thing I love to do, and I'm going to give you an example next, is writing the press release for the future of what this would look like if you were successful. So for all of you who are thinking of doing big, bold projects, if you don't have this business case, think about what would a press release look like? What would your employees be saying? What would your customers be saying? What would your CFO be saying? What would your board be saying? And you map that out as a way of truly creating, and there's more detail here, of the different steps that you can create to take that idea and make it real. And so this idea of imagine a year from now actually happened with one of my clients who was the CEO of Francesca's. And he became the CEO of Francesca's in February 2020. Very unfortunate to become the CEO of a retailer with 750 stores 4 weeks before the pandemic hits and the high street closes. And so at this point, he had to radically pivot in his business. He had to realize that he was sat on a gold mine. And so we talked about this as we were doing a review with his executive team and his board. There were so many elements of Francesca's that there was a gold mine. We just needed to unlock the gold. So we created a press release for Women's Wear Daily, which is a prominent fashion magazine, and said, what would they be saying about us? And we needed to say it in a year because we had a very fast turnaround that needed to happen. And we created a Shark Tank style innovation lab called Frank Finds. And Francesca's rose as a phoenix from the flames. And the beauty that we launched a new teen range as part of one of those exploration Shark Tank innovation labs. And what actually happened was Andrew Clark, the CEO, ended up being featured in Women's Wear Daily 18 months later. So it wasn't quite a year, but it was 18 months later, he got featured and was allowed to be highlighted. So it's an example. I love to show the before and after and the journey. And so that was an example of something that worked. Now we're going to move on to people leaders, because I know it's something you are all very interested in. And you will all no doubt be familiar with the change curve. And I challenge you that the change curve is useful and it's interesting, but actually change often happens like a tornado. When I was at Xbox, John referred to this story at the start. I was at Xbox when Nintendo Wii brought out their controller that had the stick, remember, with the wire on it, and you could hit the table tennis game. And unfortunately, I was also there when Xbox had $1 billion write-off because of hardware failure. And Steve Ballmer actually told us on the executive team, I'm thinking of shutting down Xbox. And so we had this tornado of change. We had $1 billion write-off. We had our competition completely beating us. And it was a force of change. And so what we ended up doing was creating this innovation lab where the idea of the Kinect camera came from, which allowed you to control your Xbox with your voice and by waving your hands. And it was the first voice-activated technology. It went on to win a Guinness Book of Records, but it needed a change tornado to make that happen. And sometimes you will be faced with tornadoes, and other times you need to create your own tornado. So these are the various stages of the change tornado, and you anticipate it. You may face devastation. In the eye of the storm, there is often a freeze. And then you get devastation again when the other side of the tornado hits, and then there's rebuild. And what I often see happen is it's too easy to go through this process without intentionally engaging people. Someone asked a question in the breakouts about change champions, and this is exactly where you can use change champions. And at the bottom here, you go from decision to planning to announce to make real. And this is where it often stops, because what you really need to do is be unpacking and learning. So if you haven't had a chance to debrief a recent change, consider adding that to one of your executive team conversations so that you can learn from it. Because what often happens, and feel free to post questions in the chat, feel free to scan my QR code and text me any questions that you have, is you need to think about what level of involvement you have in the change today and what level your executives have, because often what happens is executives get involved in change until announced, and then it ends. Managers often don't get involved until it's too late. So those 50 people leaders need to be involved earlier in the process. And employees often don't get involved to test things early enough. And so there's actual involvement and then there's required involvement. So this toolkit is available in Words at Work. And I'm happy to send any details of electronic versions as well, should you want them. I always like to ask the what, why, when, and how of change. So there are some questions that you can pose here that are incredibly powerful. And then you have the performance gap that exists as you're driving through the change. So I wanted to give you a whole set of tools that you can use as you're exploring and driving through some of those changes, because it allows you to unpack that and make it most impactful. I have a communications tool as well that allows you to pick different communication methods that help you. And that one is in Rapid Growth Done Right. But if you ask for the toolkit, I actually have a Dropbox link that has them all. And they're actually labeled 1, 5, 15, 50. So it's easy for you to find all of them. When we focus on the 500, which is the broader team, it's easy to get caught up in the virtual life. And it's easy to get caught up in engaging in this way. But the most powerful way that you can engage your team is, as represented here by all of these photos, is how can you bring them together in real life? And I know, because many chief financial officers had the benefit of running your business virtually for so long in many industries, that bringing people back in person has maybe been a challenge. But if you are able to be able to bring people back in person, it really does help people on the change continuum. And I have a question to ask. It's not a poll, so you can just tell me in the chat. Do we have any Ted Lasso fans here? Any Ted Lasso fans? I'm curious. What is the word that, as the team leaves the changing room, as they're going out onto the soccer football field, what's the word? Believe. Okay, thank you so much. Why does Ted make the British football team, for those of you who haven't seen the show, why does the American soccer coach tell the British football team to hit that word believe? Because he's trying to get alignment. And what happens is you can't get belief when you're making changes, when you're trying to engage a new boss who's maybe from another country or from another industry. You can't get belief without understanding. And so think for a minute. What is the level of understanding and belief that exists in your company today for the change initiatives that you are trying to drive? Now, if you have someone who has little understanding and little belief, they're lost and disillusioned. The most dangerous people are the people who fully understand. I describe them like this, but they don't believe. They're the people who have been there, done that before. They're the cynical distractors. Occasionally you get blind followers who don't quite know what's happening, but they're full of faith and they're like, Mary, I'll follow you no matter what. I'm not sure what's going on. What you actually need is people who can truly believe and truly understand. And that's where you get breakthrough performance. So thinking about how can you drive understanding and how can you drive belief within your organization is the greatest way that you can unlock getting people behind you with your initiatives. There's one other Ted Lasso reference I'd like to make. Whether the camera is going to pick this up. Can you see? I think my lighting is a little bit too much. Can anyone guess what this pink tin contains? I'm watching the chat. Who's going to get it? Biscuits. So what is this? This is biscuits with the boss. Why does Ted Lasso every single morning walk into his boss's office and present her with a pink box that has biscuits, the British biscuits, cookies, not biscuits, the American version, because he is trying to build a connection. He's trying to build understanding. He's trying to build belief. He is trying to make a connection because he's changing the team. He's doing things differently. And this is something that we have lost around the world in the last 5 years, is that opportunity for that spontaneous connection, that hallway meet and greet, that, oh, by the way, can I just catch you for this? That in the hallway, in the parking garage, is happening less. So I challenge you to think about how can you create more biscuits with the boss moments for your team, for your peers above you, when you think about all those different numbers of groups of people that you want to engage with. How can you create more biscuits with the boss moments? So I'm going to see what questions there are in the chat. I see everyone is asking for the toolkit, so you will get them. And absolutely, I will make sure that you get them. I see a great question here about how do you advise getting strategic continuity and momentum when there's frequent turnover within the executive team? Oh my goodness, yeah, that happens a lot. And if I say to you, you've got to take a giant dose of patience and you have to carve out time to get realignment each time there is an executive change. And you get everybody on the same page. And that requires an investment, and an investment of time and an investment of getting people realigned, because each time someone significant leaves, it creates that dynamic and that turnover and that turmoil. But ignoring it is to your peril, because you won't get that level of engagement. It just means you have to press reset each time. And I completely get it's exhausting, but you have to redo it. My final question for you all is, who knows how many times a year a snake sheds its skin? Put it in the chat. I'm going to watch to see who gets it first. Any guesses? Twice. Okay, good guess. Okay, a snake sheds its skin 12 times a year, every 4 weeks. And I have a toy snake, and I have to say toy because I did this the other week and someone thought I had a live snake. I do not have a live snake. This is a pet snake. A snake sheds its skin 12 times a year, every 4 weeks. The art of shedding is called ecdysis. And I love including new words and learning new words. So ecdysis is the art of shedding. A snake sheds its skin 12 times a year so that it can grow. It needs to get rid of its skin so that it can keep growing, because, snakes get really big. So my question to you, and it ties back to what Charles talked about this morning, is what do you need to shed in order to grow? What people, what habits, what commitments, what priorities? I call this the ecdysis evolution. It is in the last chapter of Words That Work. And it's a way for you to trigger and reflect what you need to change. It's a way for you to think about what do you need to shed so you can grow, so that you can shed and create enough time to go influence your CEO, to go spend time with your people managers, to go create those change champions, so that you can create the results that you want to achieve and that you want to receive. And I intentionally deprioritized the 5,000 because there weren't many of you that asked for that, but it's all in the toolkit that you will get afterwards. And in England, when you get on the subway, there is a sign that says, mind the gap. And I like to challenge you that there is a gap between where you started a few hours ago and what you will leave this session with when we finalize the last few sessions. And think about how can you leap from the past to the future? And you can get 24 hours of Ask Val anything. You can use the QR code, or you can go to textvalnow.com. Keep asking me questions. And I look forward to joining you in the next session where we're going to learn all about skill development and what it means to drive AI skills. And there's a great set of leaders who are going to talk next. So I will see you in the next session. Thank you for all your comments and engagement. I'll be answering them all in just a short while, and I will see you on the next session. Thank you.